My wife, the CEO, said, "You're sleeping in the guest room until you apologize." I just said, "All right." The next morning, she walked in and said, "Have you come to your senses?" when she found my side of the closet empty and divorce papers on the desk. You know, a marriage is in trouble when your wife uses her corporate tone on you at home. Not the, "Honey, can you take out the trash" tone. Not even the "we need to talk" tone that makes every man's spine turn into a slinky. No, I'm talking about the full executive voice. The one she usually reserves for firing middle management or explaining quarterly losses to shareholders who thought investing in her company was a good idea. "Daniel," she said, standing there in her $1,000 Armani blazer like she was about to fire me from my own damn kitchen. "You're sleeping in the guest room until you apologize." Her arms were crossed in that power pose. She probably learned from some TED Talk titled, "How to Intimidate Men Without Actually Saying You're Intimidating Them." Her Louboutins heels clicked against our Italian marble floor. The floor I didn't want, by the way, but apparently my opinion on home renovations ranked somewhere between irrelevant and "who asked you?" So, you ask, what heinous crime had I committed to deserve exile from the marital bedroom? Did I forget our anniversary? Sleep with her sister? Run over her childhood pet? Nope, none of the above. My unforgivable sin was questioning her genius idea of buying a $6,000 crystal dog statue for our living room. $6,000 for a statue of a poodle that looked like it had been bedazzled by a blind Vegas showgirl with a glue gun addiction. I told her, and I quote, "It looks like a sparkly taxidermy experiment gone wrong." I thought it was funny. Hell, I thought it was accurate. The thing had more rhinestones than a toddler's beauty pageant dress and about as much taste. But Sophia, oh Sophia, didn't laugh. Her face did that thing where it goes completely still, like when your computer freezes right before it crashes and takes all your unsaved work with it. Apparently, I had embarrassed her aesthetic vision in front of her interior designer, who probably charged $300 an hour to tell rich people that beige is having a moment. So when she delivered her ultimatum, guest room, exile, solitary confinement, until I groveled like a peasant begging for scraps, I just looked at her, really looked at her, at this woman I'd married 7 years ago when she was still laughing at my jokes instead of scheduling them into her calendar. At this person who had somehow transformed from the girl who ate pizza in bed and watched terrible reality TV with me into a corporate robot who color-coded her emotions and held quarterly reviews of our relationship. And I said, "All right." Just like that. Calm, no fight, no drama, no raised voice or slammed doors. Just, "all right." Delivered with the same energy as a man accepting a parking ticket from God himself. Annoyed, sure, but also kind of relieved that at least now he knows where he stands. She blinked once, twice, 3 times, like a computer trying to process an error message it had never encountered before. She was clearly expecting me to argue, to beg, to launch into some impassioned defense of my right to mock overpriced home decor. She'd probably already prepared her counterarguments, maybe even rehearsed them in the mirror while doing her 47-step skincare routine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. I just picked up my phone, grabbed my charger, and headed toward the guest room like a man who'd just been upgraded to first class without even asking. What Sophia didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known because she was too busy playing chess while I was supposedly playing checkers, was that she just handed me the freedom notice I didn't even know I needed. She thought she was punishing me, teaching me a lesson about respect and boundaries and whatever other corporate buzzwords she'd picked up from her leadership seminars. But really, she'd just opened the cage door and told the bird it wasn't allowed to fly. Spoiler alert, the bird was about to soar. As I walked down the hallway, Our hallway, decorated with abstract art that looked like someone had sneezed paint on a canvas and called it evocative, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. It was light, almost fizzy, like champagne bubbles in my chest. It took me a second to identify it because it had been so long since I'd experienced it in my own home. Relief. Pure, unadulterated relief. I wasn't mad. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even particularly surprised. I was just done. Done pretending that our marriage was anything more than a business merger that had failed to produce the projected returns. Done walking on eggshells around a woman who treated our home like a showroom and our relationship like a portfolio that needed aggressive rebalancing. The guest room door opened with a soft click, and I stepped inside what would become my kingdom, my fortress, my liberation station. I didn't know it yet, but this room, this supposedly punitive exile, was about to become the best thing that ever happened to me. Sophia wanted me to learn my lesson. Oh, I was about to learn something all right, just not what she had in mind. I tossed my phone on the nightstand, looked around at the space that was about to become my headquarters for the most satisfying rebellion of my life, and smiled. Actually smiled. The kind of smile that would have worried her if she'd been paying attention to anything other than her own reflection in her stock portfolio. All right, I said again, this time to the empty room, to myself, to the universe that had just handed me an opportunity wrapped in a punishment. Game on, Sophia. Game on. Little did she know, her CEO command was about to backfire so spectacularly that even her fancy business degree and her shelf full of leadership books wouldn't be able to fix it. She wanted to treat our marriage like a corporation. Fine. Consider this my resignation letter pending approval. And trust me, approval was coming. I was about to make sure of it. Here's the thing about men that women never seem to understand. We don't actually mind sleeping in guest rooms. In fact, give us a decent mattress, a door that locks, and minimal emotional warfare, and we're basically living our best lives. It's like being sent to detention and discovering they've got Xbox and unlimited snacks. You walk in expecting punishment and walk out wondering why you didn't commit the crime sooner. Our guest room, which Sophia had decorated during one of her minimalist luxury phases, had everything a man could want. A 65-inch smart TV mounted on the wall like a window into freedom. Blackout curtains that turn noon into midnight with one satisfying pull. And here's the real kicker. A memory foam mattress that was somehow better than the $12,000 monstrosity in the master bedroom that Sophia had insisted would align our spines and our spirits. Newsflash, my spine was perfectly happy being misaligned if it meant I didn't have to sleep on what felt like a very expensive wooden plank covered in Egyptian cotton lies. The first night felt less like exile and more like a spa retreat I didn't know I'd booked. I stretched out diagonally across the bed. Diagonally, people. Do you understand the luxury of diagonal sleeping? And experienced something I hadn't felt in years. Silence. Beautiful, golden, uninterrupted silence. No snoring, which Sophia swore she didn't do, but absolutely did, sounding like a congested bear trying to breathe through a harmonica. No midnight podcast playing about women in leadership or breaking the glass ceiling at volume level 11 because apparently her AirPods were charging. No alarm screaming at 4 in the goddamn morning so she could make her 6 a.m. hot yoga class where she and her equally terrifying friends would pretzel themselves into positions that looked less like exercise and more like auditions for Cirque du Soleil's corporate division. I slept like a baby. No, scratch that. I slept like a grown man who'd finally escaped from a sleep prison he didn't know he was in. I woke up at 8:30, naturally without an alarm, feeling like I'd been resurrected. My back didn't hurt, my jaw wasn't clenched, I didn't immediately reach for my phone to check what fresh hell awaited me in the form of Sophia's color-coded daily schedule that somehow always included tasks for me that I'd never agreed to. By day 2, I wasn't just accepting my exile, I was thriving in it. I started calling it the suite, like I was living in a boutique hotel that just happened to be located in my own house. I'd make my coffee in the morning, walk around in my bathrobe like Hugh Hefner, minus the bunnies and moral bankruptcy, and say things to myself like, "Room service is running a bit late today," or "I should speak to the concierge about the thread count on these sheets." It was stupid, it was ridiculous, it was absolutely hilarious, and there was nobody around to tell me to stop, which made it even better. I brought in my laptop, set up a little workspace by the window, and started actually getting work done. Turns out, when you're not being interrupted every 15 minutes by someone who wants to circle back on whether we should get matching towel sets or discussing the energy flow of the living room, you can accomplish things. Revolutionary concept, I know. Meanwhile, Sophia strutted around the house like she was the queen of emotional consequences, ruler of the kingdom of teaching Daniel a lesson. I'd see her in the hallway and she'd give me this look, the one that said, "Are you suffering yet? Have you learned your lesson? Are you ready to apologize and admit that I am right about everything, including overpriced crystal animals?" She'd tilt her chin up just slightly, her power pose in full effect, probably imagining herself as some kind of domestic justice warrior fighting the good fight against husbands who dared to have opinions about interior design. She even told her assistant, I know this because I overheard her on speakerphone while I was getting water from the kitchen, "He's learning humility." She said it with such satisfaction, such confidence, like she was reporting positive quarterly results to her board of directors. Daniel is in the guest room reflecting on his behavior. It's a growth opportunity for him. A growth opportunity? I almost choked on my water. Lady, the only thing growing was my appreciation for personal space and my realization that I'd been living in an emotional hostage situation disguised as a marriage. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly fathom in her perfectly organized, color-coded vision board brain, was that I wasn't learning humility. I was learning peace. Real, actual, honest-to-God peace. The kind of peace you read about in those meditation books she bought and never opened. The ones that sat on her nightstand looking decorative and unread, just like our marriage vows apparently. Every morning, I'd wake up in the suite, make my coffee the way I liked it, strong enough to wake the dead, none of that oat milk nonsense she'd insisted was better for inflammation, and I'd sit by the window watching the sunrise. When was the last time I'd watched a sunrise? I couldn't remember. Sophia's schedule had us operating on vampire hours, late nights for her networking events that were just excuses to drink expensive wine with other corporate climbers, and early mornings for her wellness routines that somehow made her less well and more stressed. I started noticing things I'd forgotten about myself, like how I actually enjoyed reading in the morning instead of immediately diving into emails. How I liked taking long showers without someone knocking on the door asking if I was almost done because she needed to prepare for her day. How I could watch whatever I wanted on TV without negotiating like I was brokering a Middle East peace treaty. The suite had everything I needed and nothing I didn't. No throw pillows that were apparently decorative only and not for actual human use. No candles that cost $40 each and smelled like Mediterranean fig and privilege. No abstract art that I was supposed to appreciate because some gallery owner said it was important. Just a bed, a TV, some basic furniture, and the sweet, sweet absence of judgment. By day 3, I'd completely settled in. I brought over my favorite books, the ones Sophia said were cluttering up the aesthetic of our bedroom. I hung my vintage concert posters that she'd banned to the garage because they didn't match the vision. I even brought in my old college mini-fridge and stocked it with beer. Real beer, not the organic, locally sourced artisanal garbage she insisted on serving when her friends came over. The suite became my kingdom, and I was a very content king. Sophia would walk past the closed door, and I could practically feel her confusion radiating through the walls. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to be miserable, desperate to return to her good graces, willing to apologize for the crime of having a sense of humor. Instead, I was in there living my best life, probably smiling more than I had in years. She had no idea that her punishment was actually my liberation, that every day she made me stay in the suite was another day I remembered what it felt like to be myself, to breathe without permission, to exist without constant correction. The CEO of our marriage had made a critical strategic error. She'd given me a taste of freedom, and now there was no going back. Game recognized game, Sophia, and I was just getting started. While Sophia played CEO of our marriage, strutting around the house like she was managing a Fortune 500 company instead of a rapidly deteriorating relationship, I started my own little investigation. And let me tell you, when a man has time, privacy, and a growing suspicion that his wife is more full of it than a politician during election season, he can accomplish some pretty impressive detective work. It started innocently enough. I was lying in the suite one evening, scrolling through my phone, when I realized I hadn't checked our joint bank account in about 3 months. Why would I? I trusted Sophia. She was the financially savvy one, the spreadsheet queen, the woman who could tell you exactly how much we spent on groceries in the third quarter of 2023, but couldn't remember my birthday without a calendar reminder. I figured our money was in good hands, organized hands, color-coded hands, hands that had never met an Excel formula they didn't love.
Boy, was I wrong. I logged into our account, expecting to see the usual stuff: mortgage payment, utilities, her monthly spa membership that cost more than some people's car payments, my gym membership that I never used but kept meaning to cancel, normal married people expenses. What I found instead made me sit up so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. There were purchases from boutiques I'd never heard of, places with names like Intérieur Privé and Maison de Luxe that sounded less like stores and more like expensive French diseases. We're talking charges in the thousands. $2,000 here, $3,000 there, like she was playing Monopoly with real money and had decided Park Place wasn't expensive enough. I scrolled further, my thumb moving faster as my blood pressure climbed. Designer handbag for $1,000. Exclusive member event at some club I'd never heard of. $1,500 dinner at a restaurant that apparently didn't believe in publishing their prices, because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. $800 for 2 people? 2 people. I lived with Sophia. I knew for a fact she hadn't taken me to any $800 dinners lately. Our last date night had been 3 months ago at an Italian place where she spent the entire time on her phone dealing with a work emergency that turned out to be choosing between 2 font options for a presentation. So who the hell was person number 2? But wait, it gets better. Oh, does it get better. I kept scrolling, my detective instincts now fully activated, and found a series of random wire transfers, not to companies or utilities or anything that made sense. No, these were going to personal accounts, amounts ranging from $500 to $2,000 happening like clockwork every couple of weeks. And then, and this is where I actually laughed out loud in my darkened guest room like a supervillain who just discovered his nemesis's weakness, I found it. One suspicious $18,000 consulting payment to someone named Julian Reed. Julian Reed. Even the name sounded like it belonged to a guy who wore too much cologne and called women sweetheart unironically. I did what any rational person in the digital age would do. I Googled him. And there he was, in all his glory, plastered across Instagram like a walking advertisement for everything wrong with social media. Julian Reed, business coach and life optimization specialist. His profile picture showed him leaning against a BMW convertible that he definitely didn't own, wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than my first car, flexing muscles that had clearly been acquainted with both a gym and some questionable supplements. His bio read, "Helping executives reach their full potential. DM for coaching inquiries." Because nothing says legitimate business professional like rocket ship emojis and flexed bicep symbols. I scrolled through his posts, each one more ridiculous than the last. Gym selfies captioned, "Grind never stops," taken at what appeared to be 5 a.m. because apparently sleeping is for people who don't want to be optimized. Motivational quotes stolen from people way smarter than him, slapped over pictures of him looking pensively at sunsets or standing on mountaintops he probably drove to. Videos of him doing burpees in designer sneakers while talking about crushing your limiting beliefs and manifesting abundance. And my personal favorite, a photo of him holding a copy of The 48 Laws of Power like it was the Bible, captioned, "Knowledge is the ultimate flex." This was the guy my wife had paid $18,000 to. This bargain bin Tony Robbins knockoff who probably learned everything he knew about business from YouTube videos and motivational Instagram accounts. I wasn't jealous, let me be clear about that. I wasn't sitting there in my guest room feeling threatened by some guy who looked like he bought his personality from the clearance section at Douchebags R Us. I was just amazed, genuinely, truly amazed, at how dumb betrayal could look when it was wearing designer sneakers and posting thirst traps disguised as motivation. Because let's be honest, you don't pay someone $18,000 for business coaching unless they're coaching you in something that has nothing to do with business. You don't have secret wire transfers and mysterious dinners for two unless you're trying to keep something very specific under wraps. And you definitely don't exile your husband to the guest room over a crystal dog statue unless you're feeling guilty about something way bigger than home decor. The pieces were falling into place like a jigsaw puzzle designed by an idiot. Sophia's sudden late nights at the office. Her new obsession with going to the gym, something she'd never cared about before because she was a yoga person, not a weights and protein shakes person. The way she'd started dressing differently, wearing tighter clothes, more makeup, spending even more time on her appearance than usual, which, considering she already spent about 2 hours a day on her routine, was saying something. And then there were the phone calls, the ones where she'd suddenly get up and leave the room talking in a hushed voice about strategies and optimization and reaching new levels. I thought she was just being her usual corporate robot self, probably discussing quarterly projections or synergy or whatever other buzzwords made her feel important. But now those conversations took on a whole new meaning. I sat there in the suite, my phone still glowing in my hand, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It wasn't even hurt, which probably says something about the state of our marriage that I should have paid attention to years ago. It was clarity. Pure, crystalline clarity, like someone had finally cleaned the windshield of my life, and I could actually see where I was going. Sophia thought she was so smart, so clever, so far above me with her business degree and her leadership seminars and her network of equally insufferable corporate climbers. She thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. Thought she had me exactly where she wanted me. Punished, exiled, learning my lesson in the guest room like a bad dog. What she didn't know was that she'd just given me all the ammunition I needed. Every transaction, every transfer, every secret payment to her business coach with the IQ of a motivational poster, it was all right there, documented in our joint account like a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to her own destruction. So I started planning, quietly, efficiently, methodically, like a man who just realized he wasn't playing checkers or chess. He was playing the long game, and he'd been underestimated for far too long. I opened a new note on my phone and started typing. Screenshots of transactions, dates and times, amounts and recipients. I documented everything with the kind of attention to detail that would have made Sophia proud if she wasn't about to be on the receiving end of it. This wasn't about revenge. Well, okay, maybe it was a little about revenge, but more than that, it was about justice.
It was about a man who'd been treated like an employee in his own marriage, finally deciding to file the most satisfying paperwork of his life. Julian Reed and his gym selfies had no idea what was coming, and neither did Sophia. The investigation had just begun, and I was about to get my MBA in getting even. While Sophia thought she was punishing me with guest room exile, teaching me valuable lessons about respecting her aesthetic vision and staying in my lane, I was building my escape plan like it was a startup company destined for a billion-dollar IPO. And let me tell you, I approached it with the same level of dedication that she approached literally everything in her life, with obsessive attention to detail, strategic planning, and a PowerPoint presentation's worth of organization. Except my presentation was titled, Operation Get the Hell Out, and the only stakeholder who mattered was me. Step 1. New bank account. This was crucial. I wasn't about to let another dime of my hard-earned money disappear into the black hole of Sophia's spending habits, or, worse, fund any more business coaching sessions with Julian Grind Never Stops Reed. So, during my lunch break on a Tuesday, while Sophia was probably at some networking lunch talking about disruption and innovation and other words that sound important but mean nothing, I walked into a different bank across town. The kind of place where nobody knew me or my soon-to-be ex-wife.
The banker, a cheerful woman named Sandra who looked like she'd seen every kind of financial drama imaginable, barely blinked when I told her I needed to open an individual account. "Rough patch?" she asked, her tone sympathetic but not pushy, like a bartender who knows when to listen and when to just pour the drink. "You could say that," I replied, signing the forms with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for crossing the finish line of a marathon. "Let's just say I'm restructuring my assets." "Smart man," Sandra said, sliding my new debit card across the desk. "I've seen too many people wait until it's too late. You're being proactive." Proactive? I liked that. It sounded so much better than paranoid or preparing for divorce. It sounded like something Sophia would say in one of her business meetings. We need to be proactive about our market position. Well, guess what, honey? I'm being proactive about my exit strategy. Step 2. Move company ownership documents under my name only. Now, this required some finesse. See, when I started my furniture restoration business 12 years ago, back when Sophia was still in grad school and I was working out of a garage that smelled like wood stain and broken dreams, I'd made the mistake of adding her name to certain documents. Not because she'd contributed anything to the business, mind you. She couldn't tell a dovetail joint from a butt joint if her life depended on it, and her idea of restoration was throwing out old things and buying new ones at markup prices that would make a used car salesman blush. No, I'd added her name because I was young and stupid and in love, and she'd convinced me it was romantic and showed trust and what married couples do. What it actually showed was that I needed to have my head examined. But hey, we all make mistakes. Some people get bad haircuts. I gave my wife partial ownership of my business. Tomato, tomato. Fortunately, I'd kept meticulous records. Every receipt, every invoice, every bit of documentation, showing that I and I alone had built this company from the ground up. I had proof of every piece of equipment I'd purchased with my own money, every client I'd personally brought in, every late night I'd spent sanding and staining and bringing broken furniture back to life while Sophia was out building her network at wine bars that charged $20 for a glass. I scheduled a meeting with my accountant, Jerry, a guy who'd been doing my books since the beginning and had witnessed the entire trajectory of my marriage from hopeful beginning to current dumpster fire. "Jerry," I said, sitting across from him in his cluttered office that somehow made me feel more at home than my actual home, "I need to clean up the business ownership structure." Jerry, bless him, didn't even ask questions. He just nodded like he'd been expecting this call for years. "Say no more. I'll pull the documents and we'll get everything properly sorted.
"How soon do you need this done?" "Yesterday," I said. "I'll have it ready by Friday," he replied, already typing away at his computer. "Daniel, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. I've seen your books. I know who actually runs that business."
That's the thing about good accountants. They see the truth in numbers that people try to hide in words. Step 3. Call Maria. Maria Rodriguez, my old college friend, who'd gone on to become one of the most ruthless divorce attorneys in the city. We'd kept in touch over the years, mostly through occasional text messages and birthday cards. But I knew her reputation. She was half pit bull, half shark. She'd fight like hell for her clients, but only if she believed they deserved it. Lucky for me, I had an airtight case and a folder full of evidence that would make her job almost too easy. I called her on a Wednesday evening, sitting in the suite with the door locked and my voice low. "Maria, it's Daniel Evans. I need a lawyer." There was a pause, then her distinctive laugh, the kind that suggested she'd heard this story 1,000 times before. "Daniel, let me guess, the wife?" "The wife," I confirmed. "Tell me everything," she said, and I could hear her already pulling out a notepad, her lawyer brain switching into gear. "And don't leave out any details. I want transaction records, dates, names, everything." So I told her about the guest room exile, about the $6,000 crystal dog that started this whole avalanche, about Julian Reed and his $18,000 business coaching that definitely wasn't about business, about the secret wire transfers and the mysterious dinners for two and the late nights at the office that smelled suspiciously like expensive cologne and bad decisions. When I finished, there was another pause, longer this time, and then Maria let out a low whistle. "Daniel, you married a boardroom tyrant with a side hustle in stupidity? This is going to be almost too easy." "Correction," I replied, feeling a smile spread across my face for the first time in what felt like forever. "I married the marketing department's motivational poster. All style, no substance, and completely interchangeable with 1,000 other identical versions." Maria laughed again, the sound of it making me feel like maybe, just maybe, I was going to come out of this okay. "I like it. Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, I need you to document everything. Every transaction, every conversation, every weird behavior pattern. Get me bank statements, credit card records, phone bills if you can. Second, don't, and I mean don't, let her know you're onto her. Keep playing the exiled husband role. Let her think she's winning." "She already thinks she's winning," I said. "She told her assistant I'm learning humility." "Perfect. Let her keep thinking that. Meanwhile, we're going to build a case so solid that even a judge with a hangover could see through her. How soon do you want to move on this?" "How soon can you have the papers ready?" "With evidence this good, I can have divorce papers drafted by end of week. They'll be so airtight, she'll need a team of lawyers just to understand why she's screwed." We got to work. Over the next few days, Maria and I collaborated like we were planning a military operation, which, in a way, we were. She'd send me lists of documents she needed, and I'd deliver them with the efficiency of a FedEx driver on a deadline. Bank statements showing the pattern of suspicious transactions. Screenshots of Julian Reed's Instagram feed complete with his ridiculous motivational quotes in gym selfies. Credit card bills showing charges at restaurants and hotels on nights when Sophia had supposedly been working late. Every piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of our marriage, and I was hammering them in with the enthusiasm of a carpenter who'd finally found his calling. Maria organized everything into a folder she called Exhibit A through Z, How to Lose Half Your Stuff in 30 Days or Less. "Daniel," she said during one of our phone calls, her voice filled with what I can only describe as professional glee, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and this is one of the most clear-cut cases I've ever seen. She's made every mistake in the book. It's like she wanted to get caught." "She didn't want to get caught," I corrected. "She just thought she was too smart to get caught. There's a difference." "Well, she thought wrong. By the time we're done, the only thing she'll be optimizing is her explanation to her friends about how she lost everything." I hung up that night feeling something I hadn't felt in 7 years of marriage. Hope. Real, tangible hope that there was life after Sophia, that I could actually be happy again, that I didn't have to spend the rest of my life sleeping in guest rooms and apologizing for having opinions. The exit strategy was coming together beautifully, each piece falling into place like a well-crafted dovetail joint. And the best part? Sophia had no idea. She was still walking around the house like a CEO who'd successfully put her underperforming employee in his place, completely oblivious to the fact that her employee had just filed his resignation and was about to walk out with the entire company. The guest room became my headquarters, my war room, my personal Pentagon for Operation Get the Hell Out. I even had a whiteboard, a small one I'd picked up from Target during my lunch break, the kind college kids use for grocery lists and motivational quotes. Except mine wasn't covered in inspiration porn or reminders to buy milk. No, mine was titled in bold black marker, Operation Freedom. And underneath it was a strategic breakdown that would have made any military general proud. On the left side, I had a timeline. Key dates, deadlines, tasks that needed to be completed before D-Day, Divorce Day that is. On the right side, I had an inventory list, carefully documenting which items in our house were actually mine versus which ones Sophia had claimed through a combination of executive decision-making and my own spineless agreement over the years.
Turns out, when you actually sit down and think about it, most of the stuff in a house accumulated during a bad marriage belongs to nobody, because nobody actually likes any of it. It's all just expensive garbage you bought to fill empty spaces, both literal and emotional. I started labeling things subtly, strategically, like a cat marking its territory, except instead of spray, I used tiny blue tape marks that Sophia would never notice because she was too busy looking at her phone or admiring her reflection or doing whatever it is that corporate narcissists do when they're alone. My tools in the garage? Blue tape. The furniture I'd personally restored? Pieces I'd spent hours bringing back to life with my own hands? Blue tape on the bottom where nobody would see. My watches, my books, the vintage record player I'd had since college that Sophia hated because it didn't fit the aesthetic? All marked with my little blue indicators of ownership. It felt petty. It felt small. It felt absolutely necessary because I knew exactly how this was going to go down. Sophia would try to claim everything. She'd walk around with her lawyer pointing at stuff saying community property and marital assets, like she was conducting an auction. But I had news for her. When you can prove you personally owned something before the marriage or purchased it with your own documented funds, that's called separate property, sweetheart. And I had receipts, literal receipts, going back years. I started packing quietly at night while Sophia was in her study doing her investor calls that usually involved a lot of laughter and wine consumption and very little actual discussion of investments. I'd carefully remove items from shelves, wrap them in old newspapers, and place them in boxes I'd hidden in the back of my closet in the suite. Nothing she'd miss immediately, nothing that would tip her off. Just my personal items, my memories, the pieces of myself that I'd slowly lost over 7 years of marriage to a woman who thought my entire personality was a rough draft that needed editing. One night, while packing up some old photo albums, the kind from before everything went digital, when we still smiled at each other like we meant it, I found a picture of us from our wedding day. Sophia looked stunning. Obviously, she'd spent more money on that wedding than some people spend on cars, making sure every detail was perfect, every angle Instagram-worthy before Instagram was even a thing. But it was my face in the photo that caught me off guard. I looked happy, genuinely, stupidly, naively happy, like a golden retriever who'd just been adopted and had no idea he was about to spend the next 7 years being yelled at for shedding. I stared at that picture for a long moment, wondering when exactly it all went wrong. Was it gradual, or was there a specific moment when Sophia stopped being the woman I married and turned into the CEO of Daniel's inadequacy? I couldn't pinpoint it. It was like watching a sunset. You don't notice the exact second the sun disappears. You just suddenly realize it's dark and you're cold and you should have gone inside hours ago. I packed the photo album not out of sentimentality, but because it was mine. My memories, even the ones that turn sour. Meanwhile, upstairs in the main part of the house, the part I'd started thinking of as enemy territory, Sophia was living her best delusional life. She'd invited her friends over for wine night, which was apparently a weekly thing now. I could hear them through the ceiling of the suite, their laughter echoing down through the expensive hardwood floors, like the sound of hyenas circling a wounded animal. I decided to make an appearance, not because I wanted to, but because laying low meant acting normal, and normal Daniel occasionally left his exile to get water or food or pretend he still lived in his own house. I walked into the kitchen where Sophia and 3 of her equally terrifying friends were perched on bar stools like well-dressed vultures, each holding a wine glass that probably cost more than my first apartment's security deposit. They all turned to look at me when I entered, their conversation stopping mid-sentence. The silence was thick enough to cut with a knife, which, coincidentally, I was reaching for to make myself a sandwich, because a man's gotta eat even in enemy territory. "Oh, Daniel," one of them said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. This was Jennifer or Jessica or some other J name that belonged to women who wore athleisure as formal wear and thought brunch was a personality trait. "Still in exile?" I smiled, pulling out the bread and peanut butter like I didn't have a care in the world. "Yep, living the dream in the suite. It's like a vacation that never ends." They giggled, that particular brand of wine-soaked laughter that women do when they think they're in on a joke. "Poor Daniel," another one said. This was definitely a Stephanie or a Samantha. All of Sophia's friends had names that sounded like they belonged in a country club directory. "Learning his lesson." "Oh, absolutely," I replied, spreading peanut butter with the precision of a man who'd achieved inner peace. "Learning all sorts of things, mostly about myself. It's very enlightening." Sophia shot me a look, one that was probably supposed to communicate, "Don't embarrass me in front of my friends," but actually communicated, "I have no idea what you're thinking, and that scares me." Good, she should be scared, not that she knew it yet. "Well, we were just discussing the charity gala next month," Sophia said, her CEO voice in full effect, redirecting the conversation like a skilled politician avoiding a scandal. "Daniel won't be attending, obviously." "Obviously," I agreed, taking a bite of my sandwich, "wouldn't want to embarrass your aesthetic vision in public." The friends exchanged glances, uncertain whether I was being serious or sarcastic. Perfect. Keep them guessing. Keep everyone guessing. The best poker players never show their hand until it's time to collect their winnings. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, one of those expensive mineral waters that Sophia insisted on buying because apparently regular water wasn't good enough for her hydration needs, and gave them all a little wave. "Ladies, enjoy your evening. I'll be in the suite if anyone needs me," which they won't, because I'm learning humility. I could feel their eyes on my back as I left. I could practically hear the gossip that would explode the moment I was out of earshot. "Did you see how calm he was? I think Sophia broke him. He seems almost happy." They had no idea. None of them did. Back in the suite, I added another item to my whiteboard under Completed Tasks. Maintain cover. Check. The next few days followed the same pattern. I'd wake up, work on my exit strategy, pretend to be the chastised husband, and watch Sophia strut around like she'd won some kind of victory. She started staying out later, coming home after midnight smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. She'd tiptoe past the suite like she was being sneaky, like I couldn't hear her heels clicking on the hardwood, or her phone buzzing with text messages that made her giggle. Each night, I'd add another note to my evidence folder, another transaction to screenshot, another lie to document. It was almost too easy. She'd gotten so comfortable in her deception, so confident that she'd successfully sidelined me, that she'd stopped being careful. Or maybe she'd never been careful to begin with. When you think you're the smartest person in the room, you stop watching your back. I labeled more items. Blue tape became my secret language, my way of reclaiming what was mine in a house that had stopped feeling like home somewhere around year 3 of our marriage. The vintage leather chair I'd restored myself, blue tape under the seat cushion. My grandfather's old toolbox that Sophia had wanted to throw out because it was rusty and old, blue tape on the bottom. Even the coffee maker, the good one I'd bought with my own money after Sophia's fancy espresso machine broke for the 3rd time, blue tape on the base. Every marked item was a small victory, a piece of my life that I was taking back one blue strip at a time. It was quiet revenge, the kind that doesn't announce itself with shouting or doors slamming, but with careful planning and patient execution, the kind that waits for exactly the right moment to strike. And that moment was coming soon, very soon. 1 week before D-Day, I stood in the suite, looking at my whiteboard, at my packed boxes hidden in the closet, at my folder full of evidence sitting on the desk, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, not even satisfaction yet. That would come later. What I felt was readiness, pure crystalline readiness, like a runner at the starting line who's trained for months and knows he's about to win the race.
Sophia thought she was teaching me a lesson. She thought I was in here sulking, regretting, learning to be more compliant, more agreeable, more willing to apologize for having opinions about overpriced crystal dogs and $18,000 business coaches who flexed more than they thought. What I was actually learning was how to dismantle a marriage with the same precision I used to restore furniture, carefully, methodically, with attention to every detail and respect for the process. The house of quiet revenge was almost ready to collapse, and I was going to walk out of the rubble without a scratch. Thursday morning arrived like Christmas morning for a kid who'd been really, really good all year. I woke up at 6 a.m. not because of an alarm, but because my body apparently knew that today was the day and decided sleep was for people who weren't about to execute the most satisfying exit strategy of their lives. I made coffee in the suite using my soon-to-be liberated coffee maker, savoring every sip like it was aged whiskey instead of medium roast from Costco. Through the walls, I could hear Sophia's morning routine. The shower running, the hairdryer blasting, the clicking of her heels as she moved around the bedroom like a general preparing for battle. Except today, she had no idea the battle was already over and she'd lost. I got dressed, carefully. Jeans, a comfortable shirt, nothing fancy. Today wasn't about impressing anyone. Today was about efficiency and execution. I checked my phone. Rick had sent a text at 5:30 a.m. Ready when you are, standing by. These guys were professionals. I was starting to understand why they had 5-star reviews on Google. At 7:30, I heard Sophia's heels clicking down the stairs. She was on her phone, naturally, her voice carrying through the house in that executive tone she probably practiced in the mirror. No, tell them we need the revised numbers by noon. I don't care if it's inconvenient. That's what deadline means. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway, watched through the suite's window as her black Mercedes disappeared down the street like a villain leaving the scene before the hero makes his move. Except in this story, I wasn't the hero. I was just a guy taking his stuff and his dignity and getting the hell out. At 11:30, right on schedule, I got the text from Rick. She just left, saw her pull out. We're moving in. I responded, copy that, go time. I wish I could say I helped with the move, but part of the plan was me not being there. I couldn't risk being seen by neighbors, couldn't risk someone mentioning to Sophia that they'd spotted me supervising a moving truck. So instead, I went to work like it was any other Thursday, sat at my desk at the restoration shop, and pretended to focus on refinishing a Victorian-era end table while my phone buzzed with updates every 15 minutes. 11:47. Truck in position, starting with garage. 12:15. Furniture loaded, moving to personal items. 12:42. Bedroom clear, office clear, moving to final sweep. 1:18. Everything loaded, doing final check for blue tape. 1:33. We're out, heading to storage, clean exit. I stared at that last message for a solid minute, letting it sink in. Clean exit. My entire life with Sophia reduced to blue-taped items in a moving truck, heading to a climate-controlled storage unit where it would wait for my next chapter to begin. It felt surreal. It felt perfect. Now came the final act. I left work early, drove home, and prepared the closing arguments of our marriage. At exactly 6:30 p.m., while Sophia was still at her business development lunch that had inevitably turned into happy hour, because these things always did, I placed 2 items on her pristine marble desk in her home office. First, my house keys. The main key, the garage key, the mailbox key, the entire set, arranged in a neat little row like soldiers standing at attention. Second, the divorce papers. All 63 pages of them, printed on premium paper stock, perfectly aligned and stapled, looking more official than any document had a right to look. Maria had outdone herself. These weren't just divorce papers. They were a masterclass in legal documentation, a greatest hits album of everything you did wrong. And on top of the papers, I placed a note, just one line, written in my handwriting on a simple white card. Consider this an early resignation. I stood there for a moment looking at the scene I'd created. It was beautiful in its simplicity. No drama, no shouting match, no thrown dishes or tearful confrontations. Just keys, papers, and a note that said everything that needed to be said in 6 words. Then I left. No looking back, no second thoughts, no movie moment where I dramatically walked through the house one last time remembering the good times. There were no good times left to remember. Just expensive furniture, terrible art, and 7 years of slowly losing myself to someone who valued crystal dogs more than actual human connection. I got in my car, drove to my new temporary apartment, a modest 1-bedroom above my restoration shop that cost a quarter of what our mortgage did and felt 10 times more like home, and waited. At 7:14 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. At 7:42, it buzzed again. Sophia's number this time. Voicemail. At 8:01, Daniel, where's your stuff? 8:12, another call. Voicemail. 8:42, Daniel, is this a joke? 9:03, Daniel, answer me. 9:12, you can't just leave. We need to talk about this. 9:28, I'm calling my lawyer. I sat on my new couch, well, old couch. I'd found it at an estate sale and restored it myself 3 years ago, one of the blue-taped items, drinking a beer and watching my phone light up like a Christmas tree with increasingly frantic messages. Each one was more desperate than the last. The CEO voice cracking, the corporate composure shattering like that $6,000 crystal dog statue if someone had the good sense to throw it against a wall. By 9:20, she'd left 8 voicemails and sent 14 text messages, each one a journey through the stages of grief compressed into digital communication. Denial. This isn't happening. Anger. How dare you? Bargaining. We can work this out. Depression. I can't believe you're doing this. And finally, my personal favorite, acceptance. Fine, have it your way. Except it wasn't acceptance. It was defeat. For the first time in 7 years, possibly for the first time in her entire adult life, Sophia Evans had lost control of her favorite employee, the husband she'd relegated to the guest room, the man she thought she'd successfully broken and molded into someone who'd apologize for having opinions. I took another sip of beer, deleted all her messages without listening to them, and smiled. The CEO had just received her wake-up call, and unlike her 4 a.m. yoga alarms, this one couldn't be snoozed. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a conference room that looked like it had been decorated by someone who thought beige was a personality trait. Everything was neutral. Neutral walls, neutral carpet, neutral abstract art that could have been hanging upside down and nobody would notice or care. The only thing not neutral in the room was the tension, which you could have cut with a knife and served on those little appetizer plates lawyers probably kept in storage for exactly these occasions. Across the table sat Sophia, and let me tell you, she came dressed for war. Not actual war, but corporate war,
which meant she looked like she was about to deliver a TED Talk titled How to Gaslight with Confidence in a Chanel suit. She wore a power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair was pulled back in that severe bun that made her look like a librarian who'd fire you for breathing too loud. Her makeup was applied with the precision of someone preparing for a photo shoot with Vogue's Women Who Think They're Better Than You issue. She wouldn't look at me, not directly. She kept her eyes fixed on the documents in front of her, her perfectly manicured nails, gel, always gel, because regular polish was apparently for peasants, tapping against the conference table in a rhythm that suggested she was either nervous or plotting my murder, possibly both.
Next to her sat her lawyer, a guy named Bradley Whitmore III, because, of course, his name had a numeral in it. He looked exactly like you'd imagine a guy named Bradley Whitmore III would look. Perfect hair that had probably never experienced humidity, a suit that cost more than my first car, and a smile that suggested he'd sold his soul for a corner office and excellent dental coverage. He was the kind of lawyer who bragged about his win record at cocktail parties and called judges by their first names because he golfed with them on weekends. Bradley had that smug energy radiating off him like cologne, the kind of confidence that came from winning cases not through superior legal knowledge, but through sheer financial intimidation. He was probably used to representing people like Sophia, people with money and attitude who thought they could buy their way out of the consequences of their own actions. On my side of the table sat Maria, looking like a woman who ate lawyers like Bradley for breakfast and still had room for pancakes. She wore a simple black suit, minimal jewelry, no designer labels screaming for attention. But her eyes, those eyes had seen things, knew things, and were currently watching Bradley like a shark watching a particularly stupid seal swim too close to shore. "Shall we begin?" the mediator asked, a tired-looking woman named Patricia who'd probably sat through 1,000 of these meetings and stopped being surprised by human stupidity around meeting number 12. She had the energy of someone who'd seen it all, heard every excuse, witnessed every breakdown, and just wanted to get through this so she could go home and drink wine in peace. Bradley cleared his throat, straightened his tie, which was already perfectly straight, and launched into his opening statement like he was arguing before the Supreme Court instead of sitting in a beige conference room dealing with a divorce. My client, Mrs. Evans, believes she deserves compensation for her instrumental role in Mr. Evans's business success. She also seeks primary ownership of the marital home, given her significant financial contributions to its acquisition and maintenance, as well as alimony reflecting the lifestyle to which she has become accustomed. I almost laughed out loud. Instrumental role? The only thing Sophia had ever contributed to my business was criticism about how I should scale faster and monetize my brand, whatever that meant. Maria didn't even blink. She simply opened the folder in front of her, the one labeled A through Z, and slid a single sheet of paper across the table to Bradley. Page 7, Mr. Whitmore. The business was founded and operated solely by Mr. Evans for 5 years prior to the marriage. Mrs. Evans's name was added to certain documents as a gesture of goodwill, not as a reflection of any financial or operational contribution. We have documentation proving that every asset, client, and piece of equipment was obtained by Mr. Evans personally. Bradley's smile didn't falter, but it tightened around the edges. Be that as it may, the business appreciated significantly during the marriage, making it a marital asset.
"Actually," Maria said, her voice calm and conversational, like she was discussing the weather, "the business's growth was entirely organic and self-funded through Mr. Evans's labor. Mrs. Evans's separate spending habits, however, did draw significant funds from the joint account. Speaking of which, she slid another document across the table. Page 12, a series of wire transfers totaling $24,000 to one Julian Reed, who lists his qualifications as, and I quote, life experience and alpha mindset on his Instagram profile. Mrs. Evans, would you care to explain the business purpose of these transfers?"
Sophia went pale. Not pale like she'd seen a ghost, but pale like she was the ghost and someone had just turned on all the lights. "Mr. Reed." Bradley flipped through the pages, his confidence evaporating like water on a hot skillet.
Is a self-described business coach, Maria continued, pulling out her phone and turning it to show Bradley, whose LinkedIn profile lists his qualifications as life experience and whose Instagram is primarily gym selfies and motivational quotes stolen from actual successful people. Fascinating consultant choice.
Bradley flipped through more pages, his confidence evaporating like water on a hot skillet. There were the bank statements showing Sophia's spending patterns, the credit card bills with charges at hotels on nights she'd claimed to be working late, the text messages, oh, the text messages, that Maria had legally obtained through discovery. Messages between Sophia and Julian that were less about business optimization and more about, well, let's just say the only thing being optimized was their ability to be terrible people.
Page 15, Maria said helpfully, shows a particularly interesting exchange where Mrs. Evans instructs Mr. Reed to delete this, babe. Unfortunately for Mrs. Evans, Mr. Reed apparently doesn't understand how phone backups work. Technology is tricky that way.
The silence in that room was absolutely delicious. It tasted better than the most expensive meal Sophia had ever charged to our joint account. It felt better than sleeping diagonally in the suite. It was the sound of karma, showing up late, but making a spectacular entrance.
Bradley cleared his throat, flipped through a few more pages, then whispered something to Sophia. She shook her head violently, her composure cracking like cheap porcelain. She whispered back, her voice rising just enough that we could all hear her say, "This is ridiculous. That's not what it looks like."
Mrs. Evans, Patricia, the mediator, said, her tired voice carrying a note of warning, "Perhaps you'd like to take a moment to consult with your attorney privately."
"I don't need a moment," Sophia snapped, her CEO voice breaking through. "This is, Daniel, you can't actually believe. We can work this out. This is all a misunderstanding."
I looked at her, really looked at her. At this woman I'd married 7 years ago, who'd somehow convinced herself that she was the victim in a story where she was clearly the villain. At this person who'd relegated me to a guest room, spent our money on a glorified Instagram model with a motivational quote addiction, and now sat across from me trying to gaslight her way out of documented evidence. "Sophia," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the conference room, "the only misunderstanding is the one where you thought I was stupid enough not to notice." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish trying to breathe air. No words came out. The CEO had no prepared statement for this scenario. Maria slid another document across the table. "Given the evidence of marital misconduct and misuse of joint funds, we're prepared to offer the following settlement. Mrs. Evans receives temporary alimony of $2,000 per month for 18 months, allowing her time to, as she likes to say, optimize her career opportunities. She keeps her personal vehicle, her personal bank account, and any assets she can prove she purchased with documented separate funds. Mr. Evans retains full ownership of his business, the marital home, and all items he can demonstrate were his separate property prior to or during the marriage." "$2,000 a month?" Bradley sputtered, finally finding his voice. "That's less than her monthly manicure budget." "Yes," Maria finished. "Perhaps Mrs. Evans should have considered that before spending $18,000 on a business coach who specializes in bicep curls and motivational plagiarism." Even Patricia, the mediator, had to hide a smile at that one. The meeting lasted another 2 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. By the end of it, Sophia sat slumped in her chair, her perfect posture finally defeated, while Bradley tried desperately to negotiate better terms and failed spectacularly. The evidence was too solid, the case too clear, the karma too perfectly served. As we filed out of the conference room, Patricia pulled me aside. "Mr. Evans," she said, her tired eyes showing something that might have been respect. "In 20 years of doing this job, I've never seen someone so thoroughly prepared. Well done. Thank you, I replied. I had a lot of time to plan. Guest room exile is very productive. She actually laughed at that, a real laugh that suggested she'd needed something funny in her day. Outside the building, Maria turned to me, her professional demeanor cracking into a genuine smile. Daniel, that was beautiful. Did you see her face when we brought up the text messages? I did, I said, feeling lighter than I had in years. I really did. Drinks are on me, Maria announced. You just won the Divorce Olympics, and I want to celebrate the gold medal. As we walked away, I glanced back one last time to see Sophia standing by her Mercedes, phone pressed to her ear, probably calling Julian to explain why their gravy train had just derailed. Even from a distance, I could see the defeat in her posture, the reality finally settling in that this wasn't a negotiation she could win through force of personality or designer suits. The boardroom divorce was over, and for once, the CEO had lost. Freedom looked good on me. Not in some metaphorical, abstract way that people talk about when they're trying to sound deep on social media. I mean literally, physically, tangibly good. I'd lost 15 pounds without trying, mostly because I was no longer stress-eating my way through a marriage that felt like a prison sentence with expensive furniture. I'd wake up on Saturday mornings and make pancakes without someone telling me that carbs were inflammatory and I should really try her latest diet trend. I'd watch whatever I wanted on TV without negotiating like I was brokering a Middle East peace treaty. I'd invite friends over, actual friends, not people I was obligated to network with, and we'd drink beer and laugh, and nobody would check their phone every 5 minutes or start talking about disrupting the industry. I even started a podcast because apparently freedom makes you do things you never thought you'd do. It was called Things My Ex Should Have Appreciated, and it was exactly what it sounded like. Me talking about life, relationships, restoration work, and all the lessons I'd learned from 7 years of marriage to a woman who thought love was a performance review. I recorded episodes in my loft, usually late at night with a beer in hand, just talking into a microphone like I was having a conversation with an old friend. The podcast started as a joke, something to amuse myself and maybe 3 people who stumbled across it by accident. But then it grew. People found it. People related to it. Apparently, the world was full of men and women who'd been in relationships where they felt like employees instead of partners, where they'd slowly lost themselves trying to meet impossible standards set by people who confused control with love. Within 3 months, I had 5,000 subscribers. By 6 months, 20,000. People would email me their stories and I'd read them on the show, and we'd all have this collective moment of, holy shit, I'm not crazy. This actually happened to other people too. It was therapy, except cheaper and with more sarcasm. The reviews were my favorite part. Finally, someone who gets it, one person wrote. Daniel talks about divorce like a normal person instead of a self-help guru. 5 stars. Another said, this podcast saved my marriage because I realized I was turning into the person Daniel divorced, changed my behavior immediately. And my personal favorite? I listen to this while my wife is at yoga and remember why I married someone who doesn't own a single crystal dog statue. Money started coming in from the podcast. Not a fortune, but enough to cover my bar tab and contribute to my Never Again fund, which was what I called my savings account for hiring lawyers if I ever got stupid enough to remarry. Spoiler alert, I wasn't planning on it. Life was good. Life was really, genuinely, honestly good, in a way it hadn't been in years. I was living in a cramped loft above my business, working 70-hour weeks, and I'd never been happier. Turns out the secret to happiness isn't a big house or expensive furniture or a partner who treats you like a subsidiary of their personal empire. The secret is being yourself without apologizing for it. And then came Nina. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those perfect fall days where the air is crisp and the light comes through the windows at just the right angle to make everything look like a painting. I was in the showroom working on refinishing a 1920s Art Deco dresser that someone had painted over with about 17 coats of white paint. A crime against furniture that I was in the process of correcting when the bell above the door chimed.
I looked up, and there she was. Nina Morales, though I didn't know her name yet. All I knew was that she had dark, curly hair pulled back in a messy bun, wore paint-stained jeans and a flannel shirt like she'd actually been working instead of trying to look like she'd been working, and had the kind of smile that suggested she found the world generally amusing instead of constantly disappointing. "Hi," she said, walking in and immediately gravitating toward a salvaged light fixture I'd restored the previous week, an old industrial pendant lamp from a factory that had been torn down in the 50s. "Is this original glass or a reproduction?" "Original," I said, setting down my sandpaper and wiping my hands on my work apron. "Found it at an estate sale in Pennsylvania. The woman who owned it said it hung in her grandfather's workshop for 40 years. Nina ran her fingers along the metal housing, examining it with the kind of attention that suggested she actually cared about the answer instead of just making conversation. "It's beautiful. The patina is perfect. I'm working on a restaurant redesign and I've been looking for authentic industrial lighting. Everything I find is either actually old but falling apart or fake vintage that looks like it came from a catalog titled Brookman Clichés." I laughed, actually laughed, the kind that comes from genuine amusement instead of polite obligation. "You just described 90% of what people try to sell as vintage these days, right?" She turned to look at me, and her smile widened. "I'm Nina, by the way, interior designer specializing in spaces that don't look like Pinterest threw up on them." "Daniel," I replied, extending my hand, "furniture restoration, specializing in saving things that people were about to throw away because they didn't match the aesthetic." Her handshake was firm, confident, the grip of someone who actually used their hands for work. "We're going to get along great," she said.
Nina became a regular at the shop, stopping by 2 or 3 times a week to check on pieces I was restoring for her projects, or just to chat about design and craftsmanship and the general ridiculousness of people who thought reclaimed barnwood was a personality trait. She was smart, funny, passionate about her work in a way that reminded me why I loved what I did. She'd get genuinely excited about finding the perfect drawer pulls or discovering that a table I was working on had its original finish underneath 6 layers of questionable life choices. We started grabbing coffee together, then lunch, then drinks after work, sitting at the bar down the street from my shop, talking about everything from furniture trends to terrible movies to our respective disaster relationship stories. She'd been married too briefly to a guy who turned out to be more interested in his CrossFit coach than his wife. "I should have known," she said one evening, laughing at the memory instead of crying about it, which I respected. "He named our dog Gaines. That's a red flag the size of Texas." "My ex-wife spent $6,000 on a crystal dog statue," I countered. "Oh, you win. You definitely win the bad marriage Olympics." It was easy talking to Nina, effortless in a way that conversation had never been with Sophia, where every discussion felt like a negotiation and every joke required a legal disclaimer. With Nina, I could just be myself, sarcastic, occasionally crude, passionate about furniture restoration in a way that most people found weird, but she found charming. One afternoon, about 2 months after we'd met, Nina came into the shop looking for antique lighting fixtures for a project. I showed her what I had, a collection of salvaged chandeliers, sconces, and pendant lamps that I had accumulated over the years. She was examining a 1940s chandelier when I told her the story. The whole story. The guest room exile, the crystal dog statue, the business coach with the gym selfies, the midnight move, all of it. When I got to the part about the statue, she just looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You should have kept it. It would have been perfect for the trash." I think that's when I knew, when I really knew. Not that I loved her, it was too soon for that, and I was too smart to rush into anything after what I'd just escaped. But I knew that I was healed, that I was ready, that I'd finally finished the journey from bitter divorced guy to person who could actually laugh about his past instead of being haunted by it. Nina wasn't Sophia. She didn't wear power suits or talk about synergy or treat relationships like quarterly reports. She got paint under her fingernails and laughed at terrible jokes and appreciated things for their craftsmanship instead of their Instagram potential.
She was real in a way that Sophia had never been, comfortable in her own skin instead of constantly performing for an invisible audience.
We started dating officially a few weeks later. Nothing dramatic or grand, just a natural progression from friends who enjoyed each other's company to people who wanted to enjoy each other's company exclusively. She'd come over to the loft and we'd cook dinner together, actually cook, not order takeout from restaurants that didn't list prices. We'd watch movies without checking our phones. We'd talk until 2 in the morning about everything and nothing. The kind of conversations that happen when you're with someone who actually listens instead of just waiting for their turn to talk. The best part, the absolute best part, there were no games, no power plays, no tests to see if I'd notice when she was upset about something she wouldn't tell me about. No keeping score of who did what for whom. Just two adults who liked each other, treated each other with respect, and didn't need a crystal dog statue to feel validated. Freedom looked good on me, but happiness? Happiness looked even better. A year later, I found myself standing in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, wearing a suit that actually fit me instead of hanging off my stress-eating frame, holding a glass of champagne that tasted expensive because it was, and feeling genuinely content with my life for the first time in approximately forever. The occasion was a charity auction for designer furniture, one of those events where rich people pretend to care about good causes while actually just competing to see who can spend the most money on things they don't need. Normally, I'd rather have a root canal than attend something like this, but Nina had designed the entire event space and wanted me there for moral support. Plus, some of the furniture being auctioned was pieces I'd restored, so I had a professional excuse to be there that didn't make me sound like a sap who just wanted to support his girlfriend. The ballroom was done up in that modern, minimalist style that was currently trendy. Lots of white, strategic pops of color, lighting that made everything look like it belonged in an art gallery instead of a hotel that usually hosted wedding receptions and corporate conferences. Nina had outdone herself. Even I, a guy who spent most of his time covered in sawdust and wood stain, could appreciate the aesthetic. It was clean without being sterile, elegant without being pretentious. The kind of design that whispered, "I'm expensive," instead of screaming it like Sophia's crystal dog statue. I was standing near one of my restored pieces, a mid-century modern credenza that I'd salvaged from an estate sale and spent 2 months bringing back to life, explaining its history to a couple who were seriously considering bidding on it. When I saw her, Sophia Evans, still immaculate, still armed with confidence like it was designer body armor, still carrying herself like she owned every room she walked into. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her hair styled in that perfectly casual way that actually takes hours and a professional to achieve. Her makeup so flawless it looked like she'd been airbrushed by angels. She looked exactly like the woman I'd married, which is to say, she looked like $1 million and about as warm as a tax audit. But there was something different, something in the way she moved, maybe, or the set of her shoulders. She looked tired. Not physically tired. Sophia would never allow herself to look physically tired in public, but tired in a deeper way, the kind that expensive makeup and designer clothes can't quite cover up. The kind of tired that comes from maintaining a facade that's slowly crumbling. She wasn't alone. Of course she wasn't alone. Sophia Evans didn't do anything alone if there was someone around to witness her doing it. She was standing beside an older man, probably in his late 50s, with silver hair that was definitely dyed, a tan that screams, "I have a place in the Hamptons," and a watch that could have funded a small country's economy. He had his hand on the small of her back in that possessive way that rich men do when they have acquired something they consider valuable. I didn't recognize him, but I recognized the type. Investor, venture capitalist, the kind of guy who thought money could solve any problem and create any reality he wanted. Sophia saw me at the exact same moment I saw her. I watched her freeze, her CEO composure cracking just slightly, like ice forming hairline fractures before it shatters completely. Her eyes went wide for just a fraction of a second before she regained control. But I'd seen it. The surprise, the discomfort, the flash of something that might have been regret or might have been indigestion from the overpriced hors d'oeuvres. I was with Nina, who looked absolutely stunning in a simple black dress that cost probably a tenth of what Sophia's cost and looked 10 times better because Nina wore clothes instead of letting clothes wear her. We'd been laughing about something, I can't even remember what, probably one of Nina's stories about a client who wanted to put a hot tub in their dining room, and the contrast couldn't have been more obvious. I was happy, genuinely, visibly, radiantly happy, in a way that had nothing to do with what I owned or who I was standing next to, and everything to do with the fact that I was finally living a life that felt like mine. The older investor guy leaned down to whisper something to Sophia, probably asking who I was, why she looked like she'd just seen a ghost wearing a really nice suit. I saw her shake her head slightly, say something back that I couldn't hear, but could imagine. Nobody important, maybe, or just someone I used to know. She was good at minimizing people who made her uncomfortable. It was one of her signature moves, right up there with, "Let's circle back to that," and "I'm not angry, I'm disappointed." For a moment, we just stood there, Sophia and I, on opposite sides of the ballroom that Nina had transformed into something beautiful, staring at each other across a divide that was much bigger than the physical space between us. It was like looking at a version of my life that I'd escaped from, a parallel universe where I was still sleeping in guest rooms and apologizing for having opinions about overpriced home decor. Nina noticed my distraction and followed my gaze. "Is that her?" she asked quietly, her voice curious but not threatened. She knew the whole story. I told her everything over the course of our relationship, all the details I'd shared on my podcast, and then some. She'd listened without judgment, laughed at the ridiculous parts, and told me I was better off, which I knew but appreciated hearing anyway.
"That's her," I confirmed. "Huh," Nina said, studying Sophia with the analytical eye of a designer evaluating a space. "She looks exhausting." I laughed. I couldn't help it. That's the perfect word for it. Exhausting. "You want to leave? We can leave." "Nina," I said, taking a sip of my champagne, "I'm good. Besides, you worked too hard on this event for me to bail because my ex showed up." Nina squeezed my hand, a simple gesture of solidarity that felt better than any grand romantic declaration. That was the thing about Nina. She didn't need to make big gestures or dramatic statements. She just showed up, supported, existed beside me in a way that felt easy instead of like work. The auction started, and I let myself get absorbed in it, watching people bid ridiculous amounts of money on furniture that was beautiful, but ultimately just furniture. My credenza went for $8,000 to a tech CEO who probably wanted it for his vacation home. I felt a surge of pride, not because of the money, but because something I created with my own hands was valued that highly. Sophia would have said something dismissive about it, probably called it cute in that tone that meant beneath me. Nina just grinned and whispered, "You're basically famous now. I'm dating a furniture celebrity." About halfway through the auction, during a break where people were mingling and pretending to care about the charity while actually networking, I felt eyes on me. I turned, and there she was, Sophia, walking toward me, actually walking toward me. Her investor boyfriend temporarily abandoned at the bar, where he was probably discussing market trends with other people who thought personality was something you could buy. My first instinct was to walk away, to avoid the confrontation or awkward conversation or whatever this was about to be. But then I realized something. I didn't want to walk away. Not because I wanted to talk to Sophia, but because I didn't need to run from her anymore. She had no power over me, no ability to make me feel small or inadequate or like I was somehow failing at being a person. She was just a woman in an expensive dress who'd made some bad choices and had to live with the consequences. So I stood my ground. Nina, bless her, sensed this was something I needed to do alone and excused herself to check on the catering, but not before giving my hand one more squeeze that said, "I'm here if you need me." Sophia stopped a few feet away, maintaining that corporate distance that probably felt safer than getting too close. Up close, I could see the cracks in her armor more clearly, the fine lines around her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite hide,
the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hand as she adjusted her clutch purse. "Daniel," she said, my name sounding strange in her mouth, like a word in a foreign language she used to speak fluently but had forgotten. "Sophia," I replied, keeping my voice neutral, polite, the tone you'd use with a stranger at a networking event. She paused, searching for the right word. "Good. Happy," I said simply, because there was no point in false modesty or pretending otherwise. "I am." She laughed, but it wasn't her real laugh. Not that I'd heard her real laugh in years. It was her corporate laugh, the one she used when clients made bad jokes or investors said something she disagreed with but couldn't contradict. "I'm doing well, Richard." She gestured vaguely toward the bar where her investor boyfriend was holding court. "He's been very supportive during my career transition." "Career transition?" I repeated, and I couldn't quite keep the amusement out of my voice. Even now, even after everything, Sophia couldn't just say she'd changed jobs or lost a client or whatever actually happened. It had to be a transition, like she was a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis, instead of a person dealing with the consequences of her choices. "The marketing firm and I parted ways," she said, and I could hear the careful corporate speak, the sanitized version of whatever messy reality had occurred. "It was time for a change. I'm consulting now. Independent work. More flexibility." She got fired. Probably because sleeping with your business coach and billing his $18,000 fee to company expenses tends to make HR departments very uncomfortable. But I didn't say that. I just nodded. "And the house?" I asked, genuinely curious despite myself. "Sold 3 months ago. The market was favorable." Her voice was tight, controlled, every word carefully measured, like she was giving a presentation to shareholders. "Good," I said, and I meant it. "I hope you got what you needed from it." There was a pause, heavy with all the things we weren't saying, all the history that hung between us like furniture in a room we no longer lived in. I could see her struggling with something, wrestling with words that wanted to come out, but were fighting against 7 years of conditioning that said showing vulnerability was weakness. "I saw your podcast," she finally said, and there it was, the real reason she'd walked over. Things my ex should have appreciated. "Ah," I said, because what else was there to say? "So you know I talk about the crystal dog statue pretty regularly, among other things." She said, and for just a second, I saw something real flash across her face. Shame, maybe, or regret, or just the uncomfortable realization that she'd become a cautionary tale in someone else's story of redemption. "It's not mean-spirited," I said, and it was true. The podcast had started as therapy, but evolved into something else, honest reflection on patterns, mistakes, lessons learned. "I know," she said quietly. "That's what makes it worse." I didn't know what to say to that. Sorry felt wrong. I wasn't sorry for telling my truth. But gloating felt equally wrong. I'd moved past anger a long time ago, somewhere between the divorce settlement and my first date with Nina. "I made mistakes," Sophia continued, the words coming out like they were being extracted with pliers. "With us, with everything. I thought I knew what I wanted, what mattered. I thought success looked like—" She gestured around the ballroom at the expensive furniture and the rich people and the whole glittering facade of it all. "This." "And now?" I asked, genuinely curious. She looked at her investor boyfriend at the bar, then back at me. "Now, I'm not sure. Richard he's successful, stable. He gives me access to opportunities I wouldn't have otherwise." "But," I prompted, because there was definitely a but hanging in the air. "But he's," she trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. I didn't finish it for her. I didn't need to. We both knew what she wasn't saying. That Richard, for all his money and connections and stability, probably made her feel the same way she'd made me feel. Like an employee, like a portfolio asset, like something to be managed and optimized rather than loved.
I should go, she said, straightening her shoulders, rebuilding the walls that had briefly showed cracks. It was good to see you, Daniel. I mean that. You too, I said. And surprisingly, I meant it too. Not because I missed her or wanted her back, or harbored any illusions about what we'd been, but because seeing her helped me realize how far I'd come, how much I'd grown, how completely I'd rebuilt my life into something that actually felt like living instead of just existing. She turned to leave, then paused. That woman you're with, Nina, she seems lovely. She is, I said simply. Good, Sophia said, and I think she actually meant it. You deserve that. She walked away then, her heels clicking on the polished floor, returning to Richard and his money and whatever version of happiness she'd convinced herself she'd found. I watched her go, feeling nothing but a distant sort of pity and a profound sense of gratitude that I wasn't her anymore, that I'd escaped, that I'd chosen differently. Nina reappeared at my side, materializing like she'd been waiting just out of sight for the conversation to end. You okay? She asked. Yeah, I said, and I realized it was completely true. I'm really, really okay. Good, she said, linking her arm through mine, because I think we should bid on that ridiculous Art Deco lamp. It would look perfect in your loft. I laughed, genuinely laughed, and raised my glass slightly in the direction Sophia had gone. A silent toast she'd never see and wouldn't understand if she did. A toast to freedom, to second chances, to lives rebuilt from the pieces we choose to save instead of the ones we're told we should keep. Market correction, huh? Nina asked, having overheard the earlier exchange somehow, because she was perceptive like that. I smiled. Yeah, best correction I ever made. The funny thing is, Sophia had been right all along. The guest room did teach me humility, just not in the way she'd expected, not in the way she'd planned when she sent me there like a child being punished for speaking truth to power. Because that's where I learned to finally say goodbye, not with anger or bitterness or resentment, but with style, with sarcasm, and with perfectly signed paperwork that freed me from a life that looked successful from the outside, but felt like dying slowly from the inside. The guest room taught me that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing in disguise. That being sent away can actually be the universe giving you permission to leave. That punishment can transform into liberation if you're willing to see it that way. And most importantly, it taught me that the only person's approval I ever really needed was my own. I stood there in Nina's beautiful ballroom, surrounded by furniture I'd restored and people I didn't know, holding champagne I didn't need, feeling happiness I'd earned. And I thought, yeah, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Not in a mansion with crystal dog statues and marble floors, not sleeping in guest rooms learning lessons from someone who confused control with love. Not apologizing for having opinions or personality or the audacity to think I deserve better. Just here, in my own life, with someone who laughed at my jokes and appreciated my work and didn't need me to be anything other than exactly who I was. Freedom looked good on me, but the view from the other side of that guest room door, that looked even better.